My name's Ben Ball from Penguin. I'm Tony's publisher. He's just arrived. I want to say just a very few words before he comes on. Tony called me up a year ago? No, more than that.
Maybe July.
July, it is almost exactly a year ago, and said, I'm going to go back to Timor for the first time in 30 years, and I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to do it in about 6 weeks or something absurd. And it sounded an irresistible idea, and we'd published his novels, so we knew what a writer he was, but still, it was a virtually impossible task, it seemed to me, but a chance worth taking. And I've got to say, the result has exceeded my expectations by, which were reasonably high, by a huge degree. I think it's a genuine work of art. I mean, personable, fascinating, intriguing, honest, robust, all the things one wants out of a work of non-fiction. And it's covered with these amazing testaments by people who you would trust more than me to say that. So I'm delighted to be here this evening. I'm delighted you've come along. Tony will be signing the book after the event, but I'll get off now and leave it to Tony to tell you some of his story.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Ben. That was an interesting moment when I had the idea of writing a book about going back to Timor. How that happened was that the film director, Robert Connolly, who's a friend of mine and who I met at film school in 1993. I was doing screenwriting. I was trained to not be a journalist for a change. And Robert came to my house in 1993 and said, what are you up to? And I said, well, look, not a lot. I'm writing a film for you. He said, thank you very much. I'll have it. And that was his first short film. But also I said to him, listen, do you know what happened in Timor? And he said, not really. And that's typical you find of people of a certain generation. I mean, I'm 60 years old this year. Hard to accept, but the truth. And he said, tell me about what happened. And I told him, and he was just fascinated. And he said, I'm going to make a movie about that one day. And I said, well, good luck, because A, the Indonesians still occupy East Timor. People had tried to make mini-series about Timor, etc. But here we are 15 years later, and the film's made, and it's going to be opening the Melbourne Film Festival at the end of July and in the cinemas in August. But in that process, he said, you must come up to Balibo with us and help us work through what it was like in 1975. And that was a very intriguing possibility for me to go back. It also gave me a chance to go back to Timor with people I knew and felt comfortable with, because I had a lot of demons from the events of 1975. And so I thought, okay, I'll do this. And then I thought, well, maybe I can write a book about it at the same time. So I sent an email to Ben Ball, who I didn't know, but I'd heard good things about. And within about 5 minutes, the phone rang, and he said, let's do it. And that was very encouraging. And after we'd done some deal making, he said, I don't really know what this book's going to be about, but I guess you don't know either. And I said, no, I don't know. And I had the idea that it would be a book about following a film crew around Timor, with a little bit of background from 1975. But of course, I guess I should have expected that being there brought out 1975 in me. And so when I came back home to Sydney and started writing, what it ended up becoming was a very emotional journey through 1975 with a little bit of film from 2008 in it as well. I've talked for the past 3 days with the media about the book, and a lot of the media interest is about, of course, the political situation, unresolved matters to do with East Timor. But I thought tonight I'd make it much more personal. I like the environment here, and I feel I can share some of the experiences that shaped me as a person by going to East Timor. I was sent there in 1975 by the ABC, where I was a television journalist. I'd actually been a journalist for 8 years. People find that hard to believe. I was 26. In those days, it was possible, as I found out, to look in the Courier Mail in Brisbane, see an ad for cadet journalists, and at 18 years of age apply for it and get the job. Not possible anymore, of course. So I did have a lot of experience as a journalist, but none whatsoever in a war zone. I was quite raw in that respect. Everyone's story in Timor is different, and everyone's got their own Timor story. That's one thing you find about this incredible story, this incredible country. It's a very small place. There were only 400,000 people in Timor in '75, and yet, as we all know, the repercussions from what happened in Timor have gone through many lives and altered us as people. So I'd just like to take you through some of the journeying and read some extracts from the book as I go. We flew into Timor. There'd been a brief civil war, a brief but bloody civil war, and Fretlin, the left-wing party, had gained control. And that's the situation that existed as we flew in. In 1975, the Turismo Hotel was in its 6th year of operation, although business was not good. Bullet holes pocked the town's creamy colonial walls. Fretlin was struggling to administer the country that it had, for better or worse, suddenly inherited. The young men gathered at the Turismo, dressed in combat green, had bowed to the motherly demands of Carolina Goncalves, the manageress, to leave their shooters at the door, and were eager to embrace us. We were a link to the outside world. The foreign media, with their television cameras, were finally here. We'd flown from Darwin, but we might as well have turned up from a distant planet. Who were these people who'd grown up totally unknown to me, living in a foreign territory next to Australia in a world that couldn't have been more different from mine? Had we arrived in an old lugger in another age, we might have had time to acclimatise, not only to the weather, but to the culture awaiting us. The land would have approached slowly, breezes would have carried new smells, and from the sea we would have caught and eaten what the locals ate, and heard shore life. But we had flown in on a light plane, and there were vast dimensions of culture and space and place, and even time to cross before I could connect. I'd stepped backwards into my 1950s childhood, into streets as dusty as those outer Brisbane streets were before they paved them in the 1960s, and into a world that existed before my birth, where oil lamps still lit the night and television news did not exist. The census of 1970 decided the official population of East Timor was 609,477 inhabitants. The precision of this figure, down to a single unit, was laughable in a land where Portuguese administrators rarely left the main roads and the native population kept to itself. Only about 3,000 Europeans resided in the colony, including the army conscripts and their families, mostly in Dili. After 400 years of Portuguese rule, Dili was barely a living town, not sleepy but cracked up at the end of a long and embittered colonialism. There were a few sealed roads in the centre, about 15 kilometres in all, but nowhere else in the colony. Dirt roads snaked along the coast and into the interior and turned quickly into dirt tracks. In all of Timor-Leste, there was only one truly substantial building, the grandly titled Palacio do Governo, the government palace, which was effectively the administration HQ, a white stretch of a building in the heart of Dili facing out to sea, away from the horrors of the land behind it. Upstairs and to the right was the Marconi office, from where I would transmit my stories in the weeks ahead. The upheavals across Timor-Leste over the past few months had not, I would soon find, altered dramatically the daily routine and life patterns of Timorese living in the villages. But they had almost completely eradicated the strange lethargic culture of the capital. Now the rumble of military activity, if not war itself, filled the air. But a year ago, Dili had existed in a vacuum, a town of lost hopes and dreams, with bars serving Portuguese wine and spirits, where noisy but lonely conscripts had eyed, with equally burning desire, the local prostitutes and the faded blue postcards from the place they called home. In the sporting club de Dili, the officer class had idled time at a higher plane, but carried in their hearts the same longings and regrets. So we spent a few days in Dili acclimatising and getting the feel of the place, and headed up to Balibo on the border with Indonesia. This was where the action was, and essentially that's what television journalists look for, is, to put it bluntly, bang bang. Plenty of activity to be had, but unfortunately no sign of Indonesian activity. And we spent 2 days in Balibo cooling our heels. On the way, I had an experience which was quite traumatic, and I think set up the tone for the encounters ahead. Halfway to Balibo is a town called Atabai. Somewhere past Atabai, we pulled over. A few minutes stop, said Goinchet, our driver, climbing out. This is the agriculture school. He led us past the buildings to a wide enclosure where pigs had been kept. Here, the UDT, the opposition, locked up the people who supported us with the animals. Fretland had not cleaned up on purpose, he said, to show everyone what had happened. Half a chalky human skull lay in the sickly sun. A set of dusty white teeth smiled up at us, a few bones scattered on the grass. Once an entire life. The model of an agriculture gone berserk. Fretland was not like that, said Goinchet. They were on the side of all the Timorese, but they too were only weeks away from committing their own atrocity. My cameraman Alex filmed what we needed to tell Fretland's side of this ghost story, and we drifted back to the vehicles. We were still in the dry season. When the wet came, half of East Timor's roads would be impassable, and the country would effectively cease to operate. For now, there was minimal traffic on these roads anyway. Occasionally a truck would rumble by, filled with sacks of rice and coffee. Coffee ruled the economy, small as it was, accounting for 90% of exports. A little copra and peanuts made up the rest. Most of the Timorese lived in a world beyond the export trade. They were subsistence farmers, watching the sky and the riverbeds, cultivating corn and rice and cassava for their own needs, with the most primitive of tools. The soil in many places was desperately overworked and infertile. The buffalo was their tractor, and the digging stick their hoe. The weekly market, usually on Sundays, was their social life. They drifted into towns with sacks of surplus crops to raise money for purchases from the Chinese shops and to place small bets on the cockfights. We drove across ridges and into the night. Fretland had arranged a stay in the Catholic mission school at Maliana, the Collegio Infante de Sagre, and soon enough we were surrounded by tired soldiers still in uniform, exhausted and frustrated and angry, drinking a little and smoking non-stop, toying with their weapons. The 400 students were nowhere to be seen. As the official places of education for the native peoples of the colonies, the missions provided fairly rudimentary education to develop skills for use in the regions. An unpleasant smoky vacuum filled the rooms. The one who appeared to be in charge, more Portuguese than Timorese and radically disposed, was listening to a big Panasonic shortwave radio. He was brooding while the radio was tuned to Radio Australia, and the crackling voice in English kept referring to difficulties in East Timor. It wasn't my reporting, but it might well have been. The soldier in charge kept cocking his pistol, aiming it at the radio, and lowering it and uncocking it. I was waiting for him to turn the pistol in my direction, take aim, and kill me. He seemed extremely unhappy with the radio news. I tried smiling at him once, but abandoned that when he glowered at me and cocked his weapon again. The priest appeared, the lonely José de Silva Brun. He announced dinner was ready. Pork. I looked at the dish with deep fascination. After 6 hours on the road, we were starving. There were many pigs in East Timor, I told myself, and not all had passed through the torture pens at the agriculture school. I ate heartily, the priest poured us brandies, and we retired to the balcony with half of Timor at our feet. In the lee of mountains stretching to the Indonesian half under 1,000 stars on a moonless night. Down below, the darkness was profound, but punctuated with glows along the ridges, small orange spots where firewood burned in villages. Whose side were they on? Fretland claimed control around Maliana, but nothing could be assumed. Father Brun was praying, mumbling softly and shuffling his rosaries. I heard the clicking again. The restless soldier was cocking his pistol once more. The air was sticky. Suddenly a brace of pigeons flew by, slapping their wings. Father Brun dropped his rosary and hit the floor, thinking it was machine gun fire. The room burst into laughter. He rose embarrassed to his feet, collected his long robes and shouted in Portuguese, "Pombos putas, those fucking pigeons." We laughed louder, drowning our own fears. Brun was nearly 60, a devout man of God, who'd come from the Portuguese Azores 40 years earlier and wanted to go back there to die, not to end up dead here. "Let's all go for a swim," said Chris, our minder. We followed him down to the pool, a slimy rectangle filled with tepid water and thick algae, and we stripped and said nothing as we floated right up to the stars. We seemed to be drifting at the very edge of the universe. So far, I had little to report. What could I say to those back in Australia eagerly awaiting news of East Timor? Fretlin had shot at nobody, and nobody had shot at them. Or rather, if there was shooting, we had seen none of it yet. I paddled in lazy circles and felt the brandy swirling in my head. "You may be daydreaming for 1,000 years," sang Alex, my cameraman, down at the other end of the pool. Tomorrow, we would go to Balibo and see what trouble we could find there. Well, we went to Balibo and we soon found trouble. After 2 days, I was standing up doing a piece to camera and all hell broke loose. This was the kind of moment we've been waiting for, in one sense, but in another sense, of course, it's the one thing you dread. And this is really the core of the problem of being a war correspondent, which is basically when to stay and when to go, how far to go forward and how far to pull back. And it's a very tricky concept which can result either in a spectacular scoop or your own death. And it's not something to take lightly. Unfortunately, as I said, we're not trained, none of us, the Balibo Five, myself, and it all broke loose on the morning of Saturday, the 11th of October, 1975, for us. All night long I'd been assembling a rough script in my head, and now I'd finished blocking out my accompanying piece to camera and stood before the old cannon at a slight angle, the long coastline and the blue sea filling the background. "Ready when you are," I said to Roger, my sound man. "Testing, 1, 2. Wrapped in headphones, he gave the thumbs up. "You okay, Alex?" I said. He lined up the shot and looked down the camera and nodded. "At least we'll have this in the can," I said. "Maybe we can pick up some better footage today to go with it." I looked over my shoulder to the sea and back again. "Let's hope so, anyway." He nodded. "Off you go." I took a breath and stared into the barrel of the lens. This is the highest point for miles around, and it was from here last night that Fretlin forces launched a mortar barrage that lasted an hour into the valley below. The target, they said, was a group of enemy soldiers. Alex looked up from the eyepiece. "Hang on a minute." "What's up?" "Your passport's sticking out of your pocket. It looks odd." I looked down and plucked it from my shirt pocket and placed it on the stone wall, out of frame. Let's try again. Rolling. "This is the highest point for I could hear my voice slowing against my will. Some deep instinct was turning my attention from the camera to somewhere behind me. A whooshing sound was faintly in my ear and then growing louder, and in less than a second it was deafening, flying from behind me and directly towards us. Intuitively, I began to crouch and saw Roger ripping his headphones off, and Alex's eyes were flicking everywhere, both of them trapped in a kind of terror. The screeching seemed to be an eternity away, but was getting louder and heavier, and then was directly over our heads, low and bursting our ears, and we were the target, and before we had time to figure any of this out, the shell slammed into the ground behind the house and exploded, and we were scrambling for cover, our reflexes spinning in absolute panic. "That's it," screamed Alex. "Right, pack up, let's get out of here." Before he'd even finished speaking, he'd grabbed the Arrowflex and the tripod still attached to it and thrown them both in the back of the vehicle, and we were roaring away from the fort down the hill towards this square in Balibo. Soldiers were running in all directions towards the blast and away from it. We shuddered to a halt and leapt out, trying to locate Chris or Goinchet, figuring out our next moves. And then we heard the same chilling sound again, a second shell hurtling straight towards us. Alex jumped under the yellow truck, and I looked about, but I couldn't see Roger, and waited for the shell to find its target. This one seemed to be taking forever. I was scared, more than I'd ever been and would ever be again. My whole body shook as the missile exploded, not from the vibration of the blast, but with absolute terror. everything compressed to one idea: to escape, to stay alive, to get away. The narrowness of this reflex was astounding, to the exclusion of everything else. By now, a minute had passed, no more, enough to absorb the reality of what was happening. My mouth was completely dry and my insides were as tight as steel, but the rest of my body was like rubber, uncertain which way to move. I saw Chris running over, then Goinchet roaring up in a brown Toyota tray truck with a steel cage over the back. By now, the AAP's Rick Collins had also appeared. Gradually, we were all assembling at the side of the square and figuring out what to do. "We'll take this one," said Goinchet. The Toyota had sacks of rice in the back. "We must leave quickly. We'll take some soldiers." "Not kids," Rick insisted. "Real soldiers with real guns." Goinchet nodded and rounded up 3 or 4 of the older Frettland troops, all clutching their G3 NATO rifles. They piled into the back with Alex and Roger and their metal gear cases, and Rick leapt in the front with me in the middle and Goinchet at the wheel. He roared the engine to life, started off, then braked suddenly. Another soldier appeared at the driver's door and spoke rapidly in Tetum. Goinchet was listening and took 2 grenades from the soldier, opened the glove box and tossed them inside. "What's going on?" we asked. Rick was as anxious to get away as I was. "The road out to Cova is no good, we can't use it, ambushed there last night." That was the track that ran southeast from the border, one of the 3 roads converging on Balibo. The second was the road down to Batugade, which was where the Indonesians were, the last place we wanted to go, and the third was the road we'd arrived on yesterday, but it too was suspect. "If we get down to the Nanura River and cross, we are okay, I think." "Come on," I shouted, "let's get out of here while we can. Sitting here is no good." Chris said he would follow in another vehicle. We headed off. Barely 10 metres down the road, we heard another sound, not an artillery shell, but just as terrifying. Goinchet slammed on the brakes. "Everyone out, quickly!" And we scrambled from the vehicle and into the undergrowth. A chopper was hovering loudly overhead, its blades slapping and engines whining. We dared not put our heads out to look, but lay flat against the earth under the greenery. I could hear my heart pounding, one deep thump against another, and then a terrible, sickening realisation struck me. The shirt pocket next to my heart was empty. I had left my passport on the stone wall at the fort. The chopper was still hovering up and down over Balibo, looking for us or spotting where to target artillery rounds. It had to be Indonesian. The Timorese forces had no choppers, and its crew seemed determined to kill us. Well, we got out of that. And we got across the river, and we managed to escape that hot zone. And about a half an hour later, we saw a vehicle coming towards us. And we were quite frightened. And I should say in this period, we didn't have any communication at all. There were no phones, no radios. We had no way of knowing what was happening even half a kilometre away from where we were. And we actually thought, this is it, we've been surrounded, which was our worst fear. And as the vehicle got closer, I realised that in it were a bunch of Australians. And they were the Channel 7 crew. Greg Shackleton and his cameraman and sound man. We stopped, they stopped, and Greg and I had a conversation. It was the first time I'd met Greg, and it would be the last time I'd see him. And we spoke for about 10 or 15 minutes. And in that period, I tried very forcefully to impress on him how dangerous it was. But he was quite determined to go to Balibo. Part of that's understandable. He's a journalist after all. And he hasn't seen what we've just seen. To him, there's nothing up there except bushes, and he can't wait to get up there and film it. So off the Channel 7 crew went, and then subsequently we took off again. Not long after that, our intention was to pull back and wait a few hours or a day or whatever, just to get out of the danger zone. But as we drove further away from Balibo, we came around a corner at some speed, which is very hard to do in Timor, but we actually found the only flat piece of ground in Timor, and we took the Jeep up to probably 60 k's, and as we came around a corner there was this incredible sight of a red truck coming about 60 or 70 k's in the other direction on the same road, and we had a head-on collision. And that was the disaster that befell us at that moment, because my cameraman and soundman were both badly injured, so was the other journalist with us. Our gear was smashed, and the driver was stuck behind the wheel, Goinchet, bleeding from the mouth. I was mildly injured. Some people were thrown from the vehicle. It was a total disaster. Then I realised, of course, that the grenades were still in the glove box. We got everybody to run from the vehicle, and we looked at this thing with this poor driver stuck behind the wheel. Luckily, nothing happened. We went back and proceeded to make our way to Dili. It took us about a day to get back to some sort of medical care. Of course, the Balibo 5 were up in Balibo. I met the Channel 9 crew, when I got back to Dili, and Malcolm Rennie, who I did know, and his cameraman, Brian Peters, and I urged them not to go up quickly, to just hold back a bit. But because Channel 7 were there, essentially, the competition factor kicked in. So Mal Rennie went off too, to Balibo. And then about 3 or 4 days later, as we tried to track the incursions of the Indonesians across the border, it was the evening of the Thursday, the 16th of October, a very famous day in this story. I was at my desk in the hotel room knocking out a story, and Chris Santos, the Fretlin media liaison person, came straight into the room, and as he walked into the room, he burst into tears. And he was a grown man, and as soon as I saw the tears, I knew exactly what had happened. A shiver went through my body, and he said, Balibo's been overrun, everyone's gone. And I had to rush down to the Marconi office. Jill Jolliffe, who was also working as a journalist, was there, and we managed to find 3 or 4 soldiers who'd got back from Balibo that day. And they hadn't seen a lot, but they gave us some more information. We raced upstairs, and I broke the story on the ABC that night, and by the following morning, Australia knew that the Balibo 5 were missing and presumed dead. And that was very difficult for me to handle, to file that story, having met the Moni a few days earlier, having been through the similar experience. And then I had to make a bold decision about how long I would stay in Timor, because I was being targeted still in Dili. The Indonesian Radio Kupang in West Timor broadcasting at night saying, we've killed the 5 communist Australian journalists and there's one left, and we're after him too. So this was not a very pleasant prospect, but of course part of me very much wanted to stay to cover the story. I also had to weigh up, the hardest part really was knowing how long you stay, and this gets back to this initial question, when to stay and when to go. We'd heard more and more reports that the Indonesians were going to not only take towns along the border, but were planning a full-scale invasion of East Timor. If that happened, and if they took Dili first, and if I was in Dili, my chances of survival would be very small, probably nil. So after about 2 or 3 more weeks, after filing every day, I decided to pull out. And I jumped on a plane and went to Darwin. It was the hardest decision, I think, of my life. A very difficult decision, because by leaving, you're also leaving the Timorese situation unreported, and that's precisely what the Indonesians wanted. They didn't want any journalists there. When I got back to Darwin, the next morning I had a knock on the door at my motel room, and this man was standing there, a guy of about 50, and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "My name's Roger East." And I said, what do you want? He said, "I'm a journalist." And I thought he'd come to interview me because I got out of Timor, and that was the story. And I said, "Come in and have a drink." This was like 8 o'clock in the morning. That's what people did in Darwin, I think, in 1975. But I was pretty shattered. And I remember having this beer with Roger East, and I said, what do you want? And he said, "I'm going to East Timor." I said, "Don't be crazy." I said, we're getting out because any day they're coming in. And Roger said, no, I'm going over there to set up a news agency. And I was shocked at the idea that this guy, who seemed quite experienced, he was actually a PR man for the Darwin Reconstruction Authority, but he had a very adventurous life as a journalist in many hot zones, and seemed to know what he wanted to do. I couldn't stop him, and I said, "Don't be crazy." But he went off to Timor. As it happened, it took a lot longer than we thought for the Indonesians to get their act together and invade East Timor. That happened about a month later, on the 7th of December. 1975, and a massive force of Indonesian commandos went into Delhi, paratroopers, and the place was shelled from the sea. It was an incredible day, and many people were killed. And what happened the following morning was they found Roger East, who had intended to sort of head for the hills. That was the plan with Fretlin, but for some reason he didn't head for the hills. And I explore in the book maybe why he decided to stay. But They grabbed him and they took him out to the end of the wharf at Dili, and they put a bullet through his head. And simple case of elimination. And of course, you know, standing there 12 months ago in Timor, looking at that wharf, thinking that had I stayed, that would have been my fate too. It's a very chilling prospect. I hope I've given you some of the flavour of the book. I don't want to go on too long. I thought perhaps I'd just wrap it up by reading a very small little passage towards the end of the book, which I guess sums up my feeling about that event. They say we've only got one war in us, and my days in Timor in 1975 were enough to teach me many things, not least that experience in the house of conflict is expanded, and that the exhilaration of war once felt can never be replicated in everyday life, that risk goes hand in hand with raw beauty, that life is never so intense as it is or was in that compression of life called war. Reporting the fate of the Balibo 5 was an integral part of my East Timor experience. It fueled the enormity of interest in what was soon to unfold across the entire country, and added to the terrible sense that, despite all our reporting efforts, nothing we did could stop the impending doom. And I think the ultimate message about the book is, while it's concerned with the fate of the Balibo 5 and Roger East and my time in Timor, I always reflect on the fact that we spent a lot of time over the past 3 decades talking about the Balibo 5, and so we should. And of course the media is doubly interested because they were journalists, they were colleagues. But we need to reflect always on what I call the Timorese thousands. You know, there weren't 5 of them, there were 100,000 Timorese or more died in that 25-year occupation, many of them in brutal circumstances. And the encouragement I found by going back to Timor was to see the spirit of these people, how petty our concerns were in Australia about our everyday life. These are the 4th or 8th poorest people in the world on those scales of per capita income. And they, in many ways, seem to have a spirit that look forward to success when they seem to have nothing. They seem to have absorbed all that horror. Of course, it's in their heads, they can't escape it. It's hard in Timor to find a family that hasn't been ravaged. Even Horta, with whom I had dinner, and there's a whole chapter, quite interesting chapter and at times amusing chapter of having dinner with Horta, who I, of course, knew 33 years ago. But even Horta, he lost 2 brothers and a sister, and his mother was traumatised beyond belief by that event. And many of the other players, Rogério Lobato, who is a figure in the book, who, as you'll find if you read it, held a gun to my head and threatened to kill me, and I encouraged him to do so. I was so out of it at that point, and luckily he didn't have the courage to do what I asked him to do. But Rogério, of course, while in one sense crazy at that moment, his actions were very explicable subsequently, because he lost a whole family, 7 or 8 siblings wiped out in that terrible period. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and thank you very much.